Hi everyone, my name is Arpit, and today we would be presenting on Azure Synapse Analytics. Before we get started, we would like to formally introduce ourselves. So today in the session, it is myself, Arpit. I'm a cloud solution architect with WARDY IT, and I'm really passionate about building a business intelligence and analytics platform in various industries and various organizations. Along with me, I do have David as well, and I would let David introduce before we get ahead with our agenda for next 1 hour.
Okay, Rapid, thank you. So I'm David. I work as data architect at WARDY IT Solutions, and I've been delivering business intelligence and data analytics solutions during the past few years, mainly with the Microsoft stack.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, David. So let's get started, and we would try to stick to an agenda. And looking at the agendas today, what we would be talking about, bit of an introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics, understanding what is the key requirement and what value and benefit a modern data warehouse can provide to an organization. On the back of it, we would be jumping into an overview about the Synapse Analytics as a platform. And then we have got some cool stuff to show you around the demo, which we would be showing you about the platform and capability itself. And at the end of it, we would be taking questions and try to answer as much we can within our capability. So let's get started. So essentially, we would be talking about why we are here to start with. When we work with our customers, there are some underlying challenges, and those challenges could be around maturity of the data sets or how the analytics platform has been built in the past. So it's really interesting to see when we look around the industry what we have realized, and this has been proven by studies as well, that around 80% of the reporting users are struggling to have a mature data platform. And then on the back of it, we look around and what we would find out that there are reporting data silos which are not being addressed or not being addressed anymore using the traditional data warehousing approach. So this is where we really have a need to maintain two different data warehouses. For example, traditionally we have the relational database, which is table and structures, which is more aligned to a business-centric data set, which there we can take the advantage of key functionality around T-SQL and so forth. But then on the back of it, there is a key trend where the big data sets are becoming more and more apparent. We are talking about structured and unstructured data. So more functionalities around experimentation or how we can explore the data at scale is becoming one of the key elements. So this is where we have two different worlds where we're talking about a traditional data warehouse for the relational data. And then we have a data lake approach where we are taking into consideration both structured and unstructured data. Now, this leads us to really having us this conversation that we would be looking to address some of the key challenges and then really understanding that how Azure Synapse Analytics can provide us a single platform to combine these two worlds. And obviously, some of the advantages we would be looking are around from a platform perspective are having the ability to have a limitless scale. What it means that if we are going to deploy a data warehouse, it should be able to provide us an ability to interact with a data set of various sizes or various complexity. So this is where Azure Synapse Analytics really plays a key role, which we would be showcasing and covering in the later section, that how we can deploy a service in various form factor and then address those compute requirements. The other part is powerful insight. Azure Synapse Analytics can really help us to derive insight from the dataset in a user-friendly manner, which means I could be looking into file format of file from a different format, different type of data, but still having the ability to execute the query to generate that insight is one of my favorite feature. Then on the back of it, a unified experience. What we are talking about here is a developer able to log into a single pane of glass and ability to do multiple sort of activities. It could be a data ingestion, it could be a data storage, or running those queries at scale on the underlying data set. So these are some of the capability which Synapse Analytics really enhance as compared to any other platform out there. And we have really some of the nice demos to showcase this particular part of it. The other part is security. And what we are finding out lately is that security is of paramount importance. Having the ability to be able to interact with the underlying services in a secured manner. And that's where you can use your Azure AD as an example to be able to securely interact with the data warehouse platform and how we are going to interact with that. Now, it doesn't stop in there. There are a whole bunch of secure features which we can talk about. But essentially, when we talk about why Azure Synapse Analytics, I can't find a better way to put it up that these are some of the really good features and benefits we would be able to extract on the back of it. Now, we would take a bit of a segue and we would talk about a modern data warehouse. And this is where a modern data warehouse is a concept where we would like to provide certain functionality and derive the benefits on the back of it. What does it look like? Let's find out. So within the modern data warehouse, essentially what we have found out that traditionally we have been dealing with a lot of different data sets. These are the data which could be underlying into different data sources, different business systems, or different type. So how we mitigate these data silos and provide as a single data hub, which we can provide to the end user, then becomes an inherent function of a modern data warehouse. The second part, which is really important, is supporting a diverse type of data. This is where we could be working with structured, unstructured, or semi-structured data set, but we may not need to create a new compute layer. We may not need to create a new platform every single time. When we talk about a modern data warehouse, it provides us the platform capability that we would be able to interact with these different type of data type with ease. Then the next part is unlimited data scale. Now, amount of data set which we are interacting with is ever increasing. When we work with our customer, what we have realized that the magnitude or the size of the data is always going to grow. This is where modern data warehouse really provide us the capability that it can grow as you scale, which means today we could be interacting with a terabyte data and you can scale your compute and storage accordingly. In a year's time, your data sets are twice or in petabytes. Still, these services within the modern data warehouse provide us the capability to independently scale compute and storage to cater those requirements. Now, the other part is how we interact our data set is really important. What it means that traditionally we would be running a T-SQL, which really remains a performance benchmark. However, with the adoption of tools like notebooks and Python, it's really changing how we would like to have a flexibility to be able to interact with those data sets natively. And that's where a modern data warehouse really allows you a capability that within an ecosystem, you can use a tool of your choice, and that with that tool, you would be able to interact with those services or data set, which is most fit to your environment. Now, what we have talked about are important features which really make a data warehouse modern. But let's understand how a cloud or a cloud platform such as Azure would be able to realize some of the key principles while we design a modern data warehouse. The first one is a lower cost of ownership. Again, this is where having a true data warehouse platform where we can deploy platform as a service, you would be able to spend your time, you would be able to develop more time into querying your data, understanding the data and driving insight, and then platform would take care itself of patching, updates, security, and that's where the lower cost of ownership is lowered down using that platform. Now, on the back of it, other features such as performance efficiency, reliability, and security are the underlying principles on which we can build this modern data warehouse on Azure, which we would be covering today. But having a flexibility of having a functionality that your data warehouse would be available at a highly available environment or highly secured using an AD. These are some of the examples of how we can start incorporating those different features which are quite resilient when we start using Azure platform into a warehouse approach. Now, this is a bit more about modern data warehouse. Let's understand some of the sample architecture approach, which we can broadly divide into ingestion, store, prep and train, and mold and serve. When we build a modern data warehouse, we are able to scale these layers independently of each other, and then it provides us a capability to use platform as a service. Now, what's good to understand that with the introduction of Synapse in here, we would be able to extend this capability that your pipelines, interaction with your data within the data lake would then be available within a Synapse Analytics workspace. So this is where Azure Synapse Analytics can really provide a one unified platform to be able to perform the ingest, store, and modeling capability within a single platform. Now, with that, I would be handing over to David, who would walk us through with more detailed feature and things within the Azure Synapse Analytics, and let's find out a bit more about it. Thanks to you, David.
Thanks, Arpit. So when you think about Azure Synapse Analytics, the first thing that you need to take into account, especially when you go to the Azure portal, is that you're going to find two different services, actually. You're going to find the Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces that are in preview, and you're going to find as well the Azure Synapse Analytics, that is the SQL pool. That's the database engine, the formerly known as a SQL data warehouse. For today, our focus for this session is going to be mainly the Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces. And when you think about Synapse Analytics workspaces, you need to think about a platform. As Arpit mentioned before, when you look at the modern data warehouse, so we need to identify two different components. The first one is at the top, our Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces, and the other one is the SQL server pools, pretty much, the SQL pools, your formerly known Azure Data Warehouse. So within Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces, we're going to be talking about a platform. And within this platform, of course, we have different components. The platform is going to be taking advantage of the Azure Data Lake storage, where you'll have your common data models. And then, of course, you have a data integration layer that is going to take advantage of pretty much Azure Data Factory. That's going to be our data integration layer. Then you'll be able to select different analytics runtimes, either way a SQL analytic runtime, that's your SQL pool, or an Apache Spark analytic runtime. That is going to be pretty much a Spark clusters. You're going to be able to use different provision form factors, either provisioned or on demand. Think about provisioned, that resources that you're going to be allocating before running your workloads. And on the other hand, the on-demand option is our new serverless option. That means that if you were going to take advantage of the compute power of a Spark or SQL data warehouse, you can do it using an on-demand fashion, pretty much pay per execution query. And everything is going to be accessible through different languages. You're going to be able to take advantage of existing skills in SQL, but you're going to be also allowed to use Python, .NET, Java, Scala, or R for building those advanced data analytics workloads. Everything is accessible through a Synapse Analytics Studio that we're going to see in one of our demos. But what is important to understand as well is that by having this platform, it's going to allow you to manage and develop solutions using different technologies. We just mentioned Azure Data Factory, but you're going to be also allowed to use Azure Data Lake, create notebooks to develop those machine learning and advanced data analytics workloads, create SQL scripts, have the Storage Explorer functionality, as well as building Apache Spark jobs, or even building Power BI reports, everything within the single pane of glass. that is Azure Synapse Analytics Workspaces. By doing this, actually, by having different technologies, what is going to happen is that you'll need different skills. And what the workspace experience brings together is going to bring business intelligence developers, data warehouse developers, ETL developers, or those professionals from a big data space or the machine learning space, such as data engineers, data scientists, or even reporting developers, or even advanced business users. All of them are going to be able to develop solutions and contribute between each other in a one-stop shop for analytics that is this workspace experience. We're going to be able to reuse as well artifacts, which is really important actually, and everything has a main goal, and the main goal, don't forget, that is to produce timely actionable insights. Pretty much the output of any data analytics solution is to help the business user to make decisions, right? And the whole idea about making those business decisions is to help improving the performance of the company. By having all the tools in a single pane of glass, by having all the different professionals working together, that means that you're going to be able to get those insights faster. And with that, I stop talking. I'd like to hand it over again to Arpit, because he's going to show us with a demo some of the functionality that we have in Azure Synapse Analytics.
Thanks, David. Really, thanks for that really great insight. And this is where I guess it's a bit of a good segue that we would be jumping onto a demo session. And essentially within the demo, we would be talking some of the key functionalities around Synapse, using at a user experience, run some of the example of queries we have been talking about in different contexts or different code, and then at the back of it, see how that it can really address those requirements where we would be able to provide a platform that it can be used by different roles, different persona within the business. So with that, what I'll do, I'll jump onto my demo environment and let's look in some of the functionalities in here. So essentially, to start with this demo environment, I'm looking into my Azure portal, and within the Azure portal, we can quickly go ahead and create a resource if we were to start looking to create an Azure Synapse workspace to start with. In my environment, I do have the Azure Synapse Analytics already being created with a workspace configuration. And when I click onto one of my demo environment, this is how a Synapse workspace would look like. Now, if I need to click and look into a studio experience, this is where it can be accessed via a URL. And when I click on that URL from a developer or a user point of view, this is how a workspace URL would look like. So initially what we saw, that how services can be created, and once it is being available, it allows us the capability to be able to log into a Synapse portal. Now, when we look into the Azure Synapse portal, the first thing, or studio, I should say, the first thing we would be able to find out that it is a single pane of glass we really have been talking about. And that single pane of glass allows us things like understanding and deploying ingestion of the data, ability to be able to explore the data with the underlying data lake or other services. And then we would be able to create a Power BI report and then publish it to the required workspace within this portal as well. So it's really one great place where we don't need to look for the services in different parts, and we can start really having the true developer experience. Now, first thing first, on the left-hand side, we do have some menu section items, which we would be looking into a bit more detail. But first of all, we would be going into the manage. Now, within the manage, there are few menu items on the right-hand side. And the very first thing we can see in here is analytics pool. This is what we have been talking earlier, that to match your workload demands, we would be able to create a required provision compute or SQL on demand as and when needed. Now, a really good example is this can be required when you need your data warehouse up and running all the time, and then you can compute, you can pause it if it needs to be, but it provides a scalability that I can scale up or down as per my workload requirement. The other part is serverless feature, which means I can have a SQL on demand functionality. If I were to execute a T-SQL query on the back of my data set or tables, I can use that feature. And that really allows us that we don't need those compute to be provisioned all the time. Then the other part is the Apache Spark pool. This is where you're able to create a cluster for Spark pool. And that's where you can define nodes and scalability. And obviously things like for how long this node should be running before it goes idle if we are not using that functionality, going back to the cost optimization point. Now, once we have created these pools, now we can jump into the link services section. This is where, as you would be able to see, that we have some of the link services which are already being available. But if I were to create a new one, I can click onto the new tab, and within the new tab, it does provide a lot of options out of the box, which means that if I'm looking to interact with a service based on Azure, I can simply pick that Data Lake Gen 2 or a SQL database and start creating and using that link service. But on top of that, we would also be able to connect with a different SaaS application or different file systems or things available on a public cloud. So that's where you really have a sort of a platform which allows you to connect with these applications or services natively. And on top of that, we can always use a generic protocol around ODBC, OData, or REST API to be able to connect and start connecting and interacting with those data sets. For this demo environment, as you can see, we have created and have multiple sort of linked services. And these are my existing Power BI workspace, a customer-centric sales data for Cosmos DB, and then SQL database as well. Now, let's go into, again, on the top left-hand side. And the first thing we would be looking at is the data section. Now, within the data, this is where we are able to find two different sections, and we would explain in that in next few minutes. The workspace really shows me the compute and the compute pools which we have created associated with the workspace, and the form factor, as mentioned earlier, could be provision or serverless, which provides SQL on demand. Now, if I really extend SQL on demand feature, what I would be able to find out, there are some external tables which we have been created. And at any stage, I can click onto this external table and I can generate a new SQL script. Now, this is where we would be talking about some of the experience where you can be a code first or code less. Both of the experience can be used equally within the Synapse platform, and I'll show you how. But this is where I can simply go into one of my SQL provision table, and using the serverless compute, I can run a SQL query. Now, when I'm going to execute a SQL query, it does allow me the capability, what compute provision or serverless I would like to use in here. And once I run the compute, it would automatically scale as per your workload demand, which means that SQL on demand feature you don't have to manage. It allows to scale the capability to provide you a fastest execution. Now, once I have executed the scale query, I can scroll down and I can view the outcome. On the back of it, I also have the feature that I can look into the chart section and visualize my data set, which means I can simply go in, change the category column, pick a different field, and start visualizing those outcomes into a really user-friendly manner. It can be exported into one of the formats, but again, we would skip that part. So this is where what we have seen, that once we have provisioned a pool, either a provision form factor or serverless, we have the ability to execute a SQL command or SQL query right from this console. Let's extend this functionality a bit more further, and I would be going into the link section, which is next to workspace. Now, within the link section, we can find out the external services which we have been linking, or the file or the data lake which have been linked in the earlier step. So here in the link section, I can find out that I have map, a storage account, which is a data lake Gen 2, an Azure Cosmos DB where the customer databases are, then the Power BI dataset as well. Now let's go into one of the storage account, and I can simply click on one of the folders where I do have a customer data or a user data, however, in a different format this time, which is Parquet. Now I can simply right click, and instead of running a SQL script this time, since I would like to run a interaction with the dataset in a different format, different language, I can simply create a notebook-based experience. For all of us who are aware with the Jupyter Notebook, that functionality is inbuilt within the Synapse Analytics, and it really allows us to go into a notebook, and within the notebook, I can run this Python code. But if I go onto the top section, this time my compute pool is Spark Engine in this instance, and then I can pick the language in the notebook which I would like to execute that code. Now imagine a scenario where you have a notebook and users would like to interact using with the multiple languages. It could be Python, it could be Spark, it could be Scala. You still would be able to interact using your own language within the same notebook collaborative environment as well. Now this is where I can execute a Spark code when I click on run. So this is where what we have seen, that using the same sort of interface, how we are able to interact with the data, which could be in a different format, it could be of different type, and still work with the functionalities in a different coding experience or programming experience. Now on the back of it, one of the really good other example is there is a Cosmos database, and it carries the SQL customers information. Now I can simply go in here and I can load that data set into a data frame, which means that it allows me the capability to look into any of the external services, which could be a data lake, it could be a database such as Cosmos DB, and still execute those Spark or Python codes. Now I can go in here and execute the command. And again, this would execute a Spark session. And on the back of it, you would really be able to address and interact with different kind of data set at different scale while working with that. So this section again is a bit more about really understanding that how Azure Synapse can help us to have different form factors. Once we have the different form factors, we can interact with different kind of data set. It could be a structured SQL and executing those queries either on demand or on provision. Or if we would like to have a shared collaborative notebook environment, then we can use codes like Python, R, or Scala to be able to execute those Spark cluster, which then allows us to be able to interact that data set natively within the data lake, or you can even connect to link services such as Cosmos DBs and so forth. Now, on the back of it, we would be moving on to the next section, which is the orchestrate. And within the orchestrate, it's really about creating those pipelines. And as I mentioned earlier, that Azure Synapse Analytics provide codeless or code first both sort of experience. So initially, in the development section, we had the ability that we could write the codes in the language we would like. It could be SQL or it could be based on Spark runtime. But if we would like to create a bit of a drag and drop functionality and create those pipelines, this is where it allows to create or orchestrate the data movement using an orchestration layer. Now, I can click onto one of the pipelines which I have created earlier, but within this section, what we would be able to find out that there are multiple modes of activities which are being available. Using the search function, I can simply say copy data or using data flow. So I can use this feature to be able to simply drag and drop and start building my pipeline. What it means that I can drag a copy data from activities section to the navigation pane. And this is where I could configure my pipelines in there. So this is the example of, let me get rid of that. So this is the example of existing pipeline where I click on the pipeline parameters and I can define that where the actual source data set are, what actually the query we would like to define, a procedure we would like to execute as a part of pipeline, and then the sink, which would be acting as a destination for that pipeline. So this is where this orchestration layer really allows us to interact with different kind of services as well. For example, if I get rid of that part, we can go ahead and start using and execute the notebooks environment. We can execute the procedure, or we could use applications such as Databricks as well if it needs to be. So this is where I can go back to my pipeline, and within the pipeline, I would be executing by clicking on Trigger Now. So once this pipeline is being executed, you can see that although I have triggered on demand in this session, but you can always go ahead and create a schedule, which means now you have the orchestrated data movement, which can be executed at a defined time, interval, or the event. So once this pipeline has been executed, again, I can go back onto the left-hand section, and there is a section which says monitor. Now, within the monitor, we would be able to find out the status of the pipeline. I can simply click on that pipeline, and within the pipeline, we would be able to see what is the status, how the activity got executed, and I can have that in different views as well. Now, for all of the users who are aware with Azure Data Factory in the past, this is where it gets a bit more interesting, that all of these functionalities earlier we were executing from a Data Factory console can now be executed and created within the Azure Data Factory pipeline. All right, so what we've seen in the last few minutes is the ability to run queries in a different form factors, and then how we can orchestrate a pipeline. That pipeline obviously can be between a source and a sink, and that's where the linked service, which we saw into the managed sections, are quite important. Once the pipelines are being scheduled and executed, we can find out their status and monitor that by looking into this place, but obviously we can send these logs and alert to the other services as well. Now, let's jump on to the another part, and for this section, we would be going back to the development, which is on the left-hand side. So let's go into development, and in the next few steps, we would be talking about creating the Power BI reports on the back of the existing data sets or the data which we have available within the Synapse. So in a traditional way, what we would be having is a Power BI environment, and within the Power BI environment, we would be having the workspaces. Now, on the back of the native integration, what I have done, we have created a linked service within the Azure Synapse, which means that it allows me the capability that I can look into the data set, create the report on demand, make changes, and then publish them into Power BI from this console. So let's go ahead and click on the plus icon on the top. And from the plus icon, I would be going into the section which says Power BI report. But before I go there, as you can see that it really allows a lot of core things which we would like to achieve. For example, you can create a SQL script or a notebook or data flow. But right now we are going to focus on Power BI report. And let's select our data set. So I'm going to pick a data set which is coming on the back of a serverless data set. And when I connect with this data set, we would be able to start creating report within this console. Now, what I can see that this is again a Power BI reporting view, and these are the fields which are being available within my data set. Let's try to do some couple of visuals and see whether we can publish that. So I can go in here and look for a field which says, show me the subtotal for the sales field. Now, once it is done, it would work on the back of the data set which we have published within the Synapse, and we can find out a figure. Now, let's ahead and find out another metric, which is territory. And we would like to find out a country region code. So let's go in there. So this is where what we can see that even without leaving this interface, I can start working on the data set, which we have published on the back of the pipelines or the steps earlier within the Synapse. And then on the back of it, we can create those visuals and then start publishing to Power BI report. Now, what it means that I can simply go into the file section, and from the file section, I can click on save a copy of this report, and let's call it sample sales report. Now, once I have saved that report, this report would be published into my Power BI workspace, which means if I go into the Power BI and look into my workspace, change the view. So this is where we find out that these reports are now being available, which I published with the name sample sales report. And if I would like to see the lineage, then we can find out that this is coming on the back of a serverless data set, which is being published on a demand of a query we executed in the Synapse. So I guess this is where we can find out it is a really single pane of glass user experience where we can start looking in some of these functionality without leaving the Synapse console and start building our pipelines or start creating the data set, use the different coding experience as per our requirement and build it. With that is pretty much in terms of the demo, but I hope you enjoyed the demo. And if you have any questions on the back of it, we would like to answer them at the back of, end of this session. But I guess the key takeaways are using an Azure Synapse Analytics platform or studio, we do have the ability that I can really go ahead and start interacting with the data in my own coding experience, on my own programming experience, and then on the back of it, really develop those pipeline at scale and execute either in a codeless or code first format. It really depends what is my preference. And then on the back of it, create an enterprise secure model where I can monitor those pipelines, how those pipelines are being executed, and so forth. I guess with that, I would hand it back to David. And next, we would like to talk about a bit about our approach, that how we can help you to achieve some of these outcomes, which we have shown you today. To you, David.
Thank you, Arpit. That demo was really good, actually. So from our point of view, and we've proved that this in the past, we know that it works. To deliver pretty much a quality outcome for you, we like to employ pretty much a proven multi-phase delivery approach that consists pretty much in 5 different phases. All of them, they start with D, the 5 Ds. This includes the discovery, the design, then the design, and we'll move towards develop, deploy, and document phases that are usually part of the same engagement. So the whole idea about doing this is that during the discovery phase, we're going to identify the requirements with you and identify actually the effort for the upcoming phases. Not only that we're going to include practices from a project management body of knowledge and try to use, and we'll use pretty much agile methodologies like Scrum. During the develop, deploy, and design phases, actually what we do is to continue deliver value for you. Okay, we don't want us to spend 6 or 9 months building a solution for you and you are not getting any return of investment. So we're going to keep on mind from the first day and to try to deliver some value to your business as soon as possible. Sometimes it means that we're going to build, what it means pretty much is that we're going to build the solution incrementally, and you're going to be able to see the solution by following the agile methodologies using Scrum. This doesn't only apply actually to this modern data warehouse architecture or the implementation of Azure Synapse Analytics. It is an approach that we use across different data analytics and data platform projects It works actually, and the business experience is pretty much great on your side. That's all from me, Arpit. I'll hand it over to you. Hello, Arpit.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
So really thanks for that, David. I think really summarizes our approach and in terms of how we can really help organizations to achieve a true modern data warehouse. And this is based on what we have delivered in the past and best practices on the back of it. I guess this is really a good time for us to really see if there are some questions. We would be really keen to see what some questions are out there and answer in next few minutes.
So we have had a question come through and it says, is this platform viable / economical for a small size 4 to 5 gigabyte data warehouse?
Good question. I'll take on that one. Where's the question? Here it is. Okay, I'll take on that one, and Alpit, you can add if I'm missing something. Pricing is always a key factor in building any solution for our customers. So we understand that. Pretty much we'll need to upfront with 4 or 5 gigabytes of information. Maybe I wouldn't suggest to go and use the SQL pools with Azure Synapse Analytics, but that doesn't take away that you can use the platform. Remember that this platform is going to also offer you building Azure Data Factory pipelines, orchestrate the solution, or even take advantage of a data lake or build a new data lake. It's not only the SQL pool, that relational database that you're going to use for the data warehouse, that could still be an Azure SQL DB or a managed instance if required. I think the answer to your question, to summarize, is that I wouldn't suggest to go with a SQL pool Synapse Analytics to store 4 or 5 gigabytes of information. Maybe we'll do that with an Azure SQL DB or managed instance, but I do suggest that to go and try Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces, because they are going to complement the overall solution, right? You could have all orchestration, all your data flows, build your Power BI reports, any advanced data analytics notebooks within Synapse Analytics workspaces still. I don't know, Arpit, if you want to add something else.
No, I think yeah, it's a great answer, David. And as you rightly pointed out as well, Synapse Analytics is really providing you that platform where you can perform things like orchestrating your pipeline, storing your data, natively interact with different link services, and then obviously exposing and providing that capability to the end user that I would just simply like to work with my tables in a different programming code. So data store, yes, as David mentioned, potentially managed instance of SQL database could act as a more economical, but in terms of functionality, definitely it's worth to look into that aspect of Synapse Analytics.
Great, thanks guys. So we have had another one come through. How would you select reserved versus serverless?
Okay. So 2 different things. So when you're running let me come back to the question. Sorry. So when you're creating, as you've seen in the demo from Arpit, when you're executing your SQL scripts, you're going to be allowed to select if you want to run that specific activity using the serverless or the reserved option. In the case of the serverless option, in the backend, it's going to create some external tables for you automatically, even that it's not going to persist them. And in the case of the reserved option, pretty much what you'll do is you need to create the objects in that Azure SQL pool. So 2 different things. Remember, if you were going to have a data warehouse that needs to be available 24/7, in that scenario, you really want to use the reserved option, the pre-provisioned option. But if you were going to run, try to answer specific questions, business questions on top of your data lake or similar activities, you're going to go with the serverless option. You're going to be allowed to select pretty much that within the workspace experience, as we've seen in the demo. I don't know, Arpit, if you want to bring your web browser again, and we'll.
So I think, yeah, it's a good way to show as well. I think what David is also alluding to, that at any stage, I can go back to the SQL course we were running back in there, and obviously this is, yeah. So if we were to execute a SQL against a table, what it does, it allows me the capability that I can go and connect to the right one. But again, this is ad hoc, which means if I click on a drop down, it will drop down. I have both the options that I can execute it against SQL on demand or SQL being provisioned. If it is SQL provision, obviously the requirements is we need to have those external tables being created in advance. However, on demand, that is being taken care by the serverless function. Or within if we are creating a pipeline, obviously that's where you can use a SQL provision function as well. But these are some of the places I can give you a good example or view into. It's quite flexible, and you can really pick that which option against you would like to execute your activities or the SQL query.
Yeah, that's it. And just to extend that, maybe maybe finalize answering this question, is that within the serverless option, you're not allowed pretty much to persist data and information. Okay, so what you're doing is that you're creating like links between the SQL on demand, the serverless option, and your data sources, but you're not allowed actually to persist data. You're going to be able to persist structures and schemas of tables, for example, in external tables, but you cannot persist the data. Yeah.
Fabulous. So we've had another one come through. How does indexing on Synapse as an MPP platform compare to a practitioner DEB platform? Sorry. How does indexing on Synapse as an MPP platform compare for a practitioner/DEB platform versus traditional SQL Server SMP platform? That was a bit of a mouthful, sorry.
That's a good question. I really enjoy learning about databases engines. And besides that, you may think that the SQL Server engine that we know, like the one on premises, right? Or the one that we have in Azure SQL DB or Azure SQL Managed Instance, was going to be the same as the one as Azure Synapse Analytics. That's not the case. The engines are different. They're really different. As you mentioned, one is using the massively parallel processing system, and you know SQL Server still use the symmetric multiprocessor system, so different engines. So Synapse Analytics by default is built for working with large volumes of information, and indexing is different as well. Okay, because we have different distribution, because data distribution. So the whole idea about indexing, how you need to manage indexing in Azure Synapse Analytics is different as how you manage indexing in your SQL Server database. There are some similarities, but I'll say that you'll be able to extrapolate your knowledge from SQL Server to Azure Synapse Analytics, but you'll need to change your mindset about how you do it. Okay. So by default in your Azure Synapse Analytics, all the indexes are going to be, all the tables are going to be column store indexed by default. If you were going to create heap tables with cluster indices or non-cluster indices, you'll need to do that pretty much manually. And how the performance that you're going to get using the column store indices and the heap table indices is going to be totally different. And how you need to manage the fragmentation of those indexes is going to be slightly different as well. So I'll say that from what you know, maybe in your SQL Server engine and how you manage indices, you're going to be able to transfer that knowledge to Azure Synapse Analytics, but the architecture is different. So you need to look at that differently.
Great. There's also another question. When you create the Power BI report on top of one of the Synapse data sets, is that running in direct query mode?
We created that data set before. It's running direct query mode.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. In which scenario would you choose Azure Data Factory, and in which scenario Azure Synapse Analytics? They both look like they have common functionality.
Yep, I think it's a great question again. As we showed in one of the slides earlier, when we look into the orchestration layer of the Synapse Analytics, if we have used Azure Data Factory in the past, what we can see that how we create the pipeline or how we work with that is similar. It's very same. So I guess if you're not looking, if you're looking to use Synapse Analytics as one single pane to address and manage all those requirements, then using these functionalities within the Synapse, it's quite easier to manage and use, because then it allows us to log into a single pane and start using that. However, what we may need to also consider that if you have created the ADF pipeline in the past, then and if you're looking to move into Synapse platform now, how that migration from the artifacts point of view would look like. This is something which we can help you as a partner. But in terms of experience, yes, the decision is all about really understanding what artifacts we have already created, whether or how we would be moving them into Synapse. I think the decision would come down to that. Do you have anything else to add to that, David?
No, I think pretty much you covered it. So when you look at the platform, actually, pretty much what we have here is Azure Synapse Analytics takes advantage of Azure Data Factory. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, so any functionality that you have right now in Azure Data Factory, potentially you're going to see that functionality in Azure Synapse Analytics as well. One of the things that I'm looking forward to have actually in Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces is that we should be able to bring our own existing Azure Data Factories, if it makes sense. Yeah.
We just had one more come through. I think someone's just looking to confirm that you can have the platform without a SQL pool. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, when I went to the manage section, within the manage section, you do have the ability that what kind of pools you would like to provision. So this is where I might not create a provision pool at all. And if I need to work only with the Spark pools, I can go ahead with that.
Great. Well, that's it as far as the questions go. I'm not sure if you guys want to wrap it up there or if you've got anything else to add to today's presentation before we do.
I mean, really, these are really some great questions, and it helps us to identify what are some of the really great use cases around when we look for a modern data warehouse. I guess as an organization, WARDY, IT, and MOQ, we really have great experience in terms of developing and migrating the data warehouse into a Synapse platform. So really would be happy to assist all of our customers and provide our capability in based on an approach, which David mentioned earlier, to achieve some of the outcomes. Any ending notes from you, David?
No, definitely. I think that you covered it pretty much. We're here to help. In the case of Azure Synapse Analytics workspaces, Remember, it is in a public preview at this stage. That's why maybe one of the reasons why we didn't want to talk much about pricing, because pricing could change from now to the moment that it's generally available. And from what I know, this Synapse Analytics Workspaces experience may be generally available towards the end of the year.
Yeah, David, that's a really great point. I guess if we don't have any more questions on that note, we would really like to say thank you for all the participants who have joined this session. Hope you have enjoyed as much we did. And if you have any outstanding questions or any queries, please reach out to us. But otherwise, really thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.